two more who will join us. Thanks for starting the recording. Oh, there we go. Excellent. So happy 2021, everybody. It's wonderful to see you all back in the same room again. And very happy to get our review panel work started for this year. We've got a great conversation ahead today. So as always, for the benefit of our rotating panelists participating in this committee, let's do our round of introductions, and we can either pass it around or I can call on people. We'll see what works best. But let's start off here with the top of my screen, who is Sophie.
Hello, everyone. Happy New Year. I'm Sophie McGinley. I'm an assistant planner with Community Planning and Design at the city, and I'm public engagement lead for House Bill 2001. And I'll toss it to Terry.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you all again. My name's Terry. I'm the city project manager for House Bill 2001, and I'll throw it over to Ken.
Ken Beeson, Eugene Planning Commission. And I'll pass it over to Lynn.
Hey everybody, happy New Year and a month. Lynn Davis, program manager for Healthy Democracy. I will pass it to Cheryl.
Hi, Cheryl Becker, retired preschool teacher, South Eugene.
Thanks for being here, Cheryl. How about Jose?
Hi everyone, Jose, and I'm one of the panelists, and I'll pass it out over to Lisa.
Great, thank you. Lisa Fragola, my pronouns are she, her, and I am a member of the City of Eugene Planning Commission.
Ed?
Hello everyone, Ed McMahon. I'm the Executive Director of the Home Builders Association of Lane County, and Jennifer.
Hi, sorry, I am in a shared space at work today, so I have to wear my mask. My name is Jennifer Ye, and I am a city councilor for Ward 4, which is Northeast Eugene.
Great. Carolyn?
Hi, I'm Carolyn Jacobs. I'm part of Neighborhood Leaders Council. I also sit on the land use subcommittee of the Neighborhood Leaders Council. Karin, I guess you're next.
Hi everyone, I'm Karin Knudsen. I'm an architect and urban designer, practices here locally, and the founding director of Better Housing Together, which is a housing advocacy organization based in Lane County. Nice to see you all, and I'm not sure who's left.
I think you're our last one, so that was perfect timing, Karin. Great, thank you everybody, welcome. Just a kind of brief overview of where we are in the process. We've got 2 rounds of the review panel coming up in February and April. So this meeting will kind of be geared to setting us up for the spring process. And Lynn is gonna speak a little bit more about kind of the process overview that we have coming up, but just wanna remind you of the steering committee structure, that we have monthly meetings on the first Thursday of the month for February, March, April, and May. So kind of following that process from our kind of pre-process meeting here to a debrief of the whole thing in May. So just to kind of give a lay of the land. And to start us off here before we launch into most of today's meeting and just open discussion, I want to give Lynn an opportunity to give us kind of the process overview of what we're proposing or the ideas that we're bringing, and then Terry and Sophie to talk a little bit about where we are with the code writing process and kind of the decision-making context. So let's start off with, I guess whichever one makes sense to start off with is fine.
I'll sort of start off and and then kick it over to Terry and Sophie to talk about this sort of somewhat new option here, but just to remind you sort of where we're at, in addition to what Alex said, so we have steering committee meetings on either side of the panel's work. So the panel is meeting in mid-February and mid to late February and then mid to late April. So we'll have this our last meeting before that those February sessions. and which would be 2.5 sessions there. So not that much time. And then 2.5 sessions in April. So that'll be between our March and April meetings. So just a little bit of background. As you may remember from the fall, the design of this panel involved these 2 feedback loops. One to come back in February, where the panel would review some of the city's early work, and then to come back in April and review further work. And in the process there, in the spring, also give some more general public engagement feedback. I'm going to send it to Terry and Sophie to talk about sort of the status of the code concepts, questions, et cetera, and where that stands right now, and then come back to me sort of how we've responded to that. And the other thing, Terry and Sophie, I'm wondering if you could chat about is this other idea that you've brought up to talk to sort of hopefully respond to some of the panel's other recommendations, which speak overwhelmingly to affordability issues. I shouldn't say overwhelmingly. Many of them speak to affordability issues. And there's sort of a second kind of affordability discussion happening in the city that this panel may be able to tap into and add to a little bit. So that's another opportunity that is sort of the difference between these 2 proposals, essentially, is we wanted to bring it back to the steering committee to say, hey, essentially, do you want to do just as we planned before, or given some new information, add this additional kind of affordability conversation. So I think with that, Terry and Sophie, do you want to take it away with a little more explanation, and then I'll come back again?
Great, thanks, Lynn. I'm going to try to be brief because I think there's 2 things going on that I want to mention. The first is sort of how the project and the rule writing process have changed what we thought we were going to be doing in February. And the second is in response to all of the public input and the panel work that happened in the fall, this idea of going deeper on affordability. So to the first point, I would just summarize by saying we heard a lot of, from all of the panels and roundtables, we heard a desire to consider going beyond the base requirements of the rules. And so that came out in staff's summary of the principles, which focused on themes that were brought up by various groups, and really tried to boil it down and synthesize a lot of great input into some high-level overarching principles that could guide the next phase of work. In so doing, the principles and all of the input caused us to come up with this idea of offering levels of implementation to the city council rather than what we were before calling code concepts. So in a way it's semantics, but in a way it's not, because we also got the rules written over the course of the last year, and they kind of set the parameters in a narrower way than we originally thought they would be written. So at the very beginning, we thought maybe there'll be pretty distinct ways of implementing the rules. And as those parameters have come in, we thought, well, maybe in response to the feedback and the rules, we should offer up kind of how far do we go with solutions. We know we have to meet the minimum standards, so that's sort of the baseline, and we're describing it as the first level of implementation, sort of allow middle housing where it's required to be allowed according to the rules that were written by the state. And then there's 2 more levels of implementation that we're calling encourage and incentivize. And so those respond to a lot of principles that were brought up by Healthy Democracy, including consider the minimum standards a floor, not a ceiling, focus on affordability, find ways to help low-income people. All of these things are about more than code. They're about more than allowing housing to be built in new places. So we've been talking about that, and that's what we've shaped our outreach around. And Sophie can talk about that a little bit more if we have time. But we're getting ready to launch a survey, and we'll use the same sort of information with the panel meetings that are coming up here in February and with the other roundtables that are meeting. So I really feel like the work of the panel was heavily influential on that thinking of how we approach implementation of this. And it also sparked this additional layer, which is contained within the law, that cities should consider affordability policies, including, and it gives examples. This has been by far the most interesting piece at both outreach meetings and also planning commission and city council meetings. I'm summarizing, but I think it's fair to say that folks really want to know how we can reduce the costs of building and help lower income people afford more kinds of housing in more places. So that's where this idea of maybe doing some more work with Equal Northwest, maybe bringing Tyler back, maybe we have some unspent money on the city side that we could devote to that, to kind of taking the affordability strategies further. And that wasn't really part of our original scope. But that's kind of where we are. I think I'll stop because I've been talking for several minutes. Just say that's a high level introduction.
Okay, cool. Sophie, would you like to add anything to that, or is that?
I will do I'll have a brief plug, and then if folks have questions, I'm happy to answer them. So we're launching our big community-wide survey, kind of going into broad engagement this phase of the project tomorrow on our online engagement platform, Engage Eugene. The panelists will be receiving a printed copy of the survey. So they'll receive the same information that the community is receiving. And then just 3 days ago, the Planning Commission went into a deep dive with our consultants on the minimum standards and model code, and we have a great summary that we could also send out to the panelists. So we just really, as staff, understood and built our understanding of the minimum standards and model code. So we know the parameters that we're working within, and now we're launching these into this next phase of asking, do we just meet the minimum, or do we go beyond? And that's what this engagement will focus on. So exciting that Healthy Democracy will be working on it concurrently with the broader community.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, so just to kind of summarize our mission here today from that is to sort of, well, you've seen the questions there, but the first question about sort of defining, what's most important to happen in phase 2, we've sort of specified a little bit more with these 2 proposals that you got by email. But just to review, and for anybody who's watching, what these are. So our first proposal is essentially adapting to the new information about what's available right now, but essentially sticking with the previous plan, which was just talk HB 2001 and the code choices available in February, and then come back, review at that point what are sort of more defined kind of code options and drafts in April, and also making recommendations on future public engagement. So that's sort of the status quo, I suppose. There's this new opportunity, though, where we've sort of shifted, and proposal 2 a little bit, shifted the recommendations on future public engagement from April to February, actually, as being the main work there. And we feel like we can do that because the process oversight group has already had a meeting sort of between these since December, starting to work on that, which was sort of our plan, that they would kind of take the first step in that, since they've sort of been looking at the process as far as this process goes, and as some fodder for the general panel. So still working on the sort of key code related questions related to HB 2001, that not going back on the original mission of the panel, but adding in that sort of general public engagement stuff, which was also part of the original mission of the panel, to February. And then in April, that would free up some time probably a whole day and a half, we think, or something like that in April, to talk other affordability strategies, as Terry just described. So, and then you may have noticed in the agenda, there's a couple other questions. Depending on what the choice is with those, what materials do we need to provide to the panel? And then there's this question, which I'm not sure whether we'll get to today, about sort of how do we close the gap between the panel and decision makers, or how do we amplify the panel's output and recommendations, that kind of thing. And that's a discussion that we can continue to have over the next 4 meetings. So with that, Alex, anything I missed?
No, I think that's a useful overview for right now. So thank you. And before I kind of open up to the discussion, Karin had a question.
Thank you. This was just a quick question following the update that Sophie shared. First is simple. Will we receive a link for the survey? This body, will we be included in the blast of organizations and people who get that?
Yes, it is launching tomorrow. And then on the surveys that I'm creating that will be printed and sent to the panelists, I'll put a QR code if they want to go online and take the survey. So
okay,
yeah, everybody will get it. Big launch tomorrow. Lots of emails will be sent.
Okay. And then related to what we were just talking about and the survey, because I mean, I'll know this, I guess, when I see the survey, but are some of the affordability implications, is that context shared in these questions about, go with the minimum or try to get closer to these other goals? Or is it just a question like, do you want to do the minimum or do you want to do more? Is it how much context is with the questions?
We try to give examples of, because we're not at the point of writing code yet, we try to give examples for example, parking is a standard that we have a certain amount of flexibility around. If we want to do the minimum, we require so much parking. If we want to encourage, we give an example of requiring less parking, which also reduces costs to the development. And so I would say a little bit of context with also keeping the goal in mind of keeping the survey short.
Great, thank you. Okay, so this is most of this meeting is going to be kind of time for open discussion, and I just want to frame that conversation in a few ways that are directly responsive to the feedback that we got from all of you in December. So really quickly, just and feel free to start adding hands to the stack. I will track that for our conversation. I see those are already going up. But I just kind of want to call attention very briefly to the fact that you asked for this committee to have more of a sense of directly guiding and supporting the panel's work. So I really hope that today kind of embodies that in this key decision about their charge and kind of process design. And like Lynn mentioned, we also really want to emphasize this kind of closing the distance between the panel and decision makers. That's something that you all talked about in December, and I think will be an ongoing conversation throughout the spring. And then that we're, acknowledging and trying to do our best to give you lead time to consider things, and we'll try to do a better job of incorporating kind of a summary of the panel sessions for you all. So before we dive in, just kind of wanted to contextualize that in being responsive to the ever-changing role and function of this committee's work. Okay, so let's kind of consider those 3 questions with first an emphasis on this, going with the initial charge to the panel or kind of going beyond into affordability strategies. And I see our stack so far is Jose, Ed, and then Lisa. So take it away, Jose.
I just, I get thoughts, concerns, I don't know what it is, questions. So I think why the panel was able to come up with so many insightful recommendations and concerns around affordability is because we spend a lot of time going together through being educated and the complexities and depth of the problem. And so so getting a survey that doesn't provide that context, I always think people are going to choose convenience as opposed to like they're going to go, well, I need more parking if there's going to be a building going up next to me, right? And so I'm just wondering, is the role of the survey, it's like majority wins, or how is that going to be taken into consideration given that just because of the different processes, you might get different reactions from those filling it out. And I guess to pair this question with what are the efforts to being done to have surveys go out to diverse representation so that hopefully we can get a similar diverse response rates as the panel is.
Great questions. I have answers to a couple of them. One is that we have included demographic questions in the survey that's online and open to the whole community. We can't force people to answer, but we do ask, and so they're optional questions. And to the extent people fill them out, we'll know the differences in who takes that survey. We also talked about, with Lynn, batching the surveys completed by the Healthy Democracy Panel, and so that we can compare groups' answers to one another. And the other one that I think that's important for is the Equity Roundtable. You might recall that our original approach elevated equity and inclusion, and those two bodies that are doing the most work around that are the Healthy Democracy Panel and the Equity Roundtable. And that's not to negate the rest of the community. It is open to everyone. But the more that we have information that we can assign to those different groups, I think that'll help with that issue of representation and who's doing the commenting. Ultimately, it'll be up to the Planning Commission to recommend how to weight different input. Staff will make a recommendation, Planning Commission will make a recommendation, and then City Council will decide. That's how we'll approach that.
I also have a bit of an answer for the context. So on the Healthy Democracy webpage and in an attachment provided to the Planning Commission, we have all of the Healthy Democracy presentations linked by topic and hyperlinked to the exact time in the YouTube presentation. So I could link to that at the beginning of the survey if folks want more information. And then we also, through marketing the survey, are going to provide some context through a series of Facebook Live. It's a little bit of an experiment, but Facebook Live conversations talking about land use regulation and its relationship to larger topics. So tonight at 5:30, we're going to kick off land use and its connection to transportation. And then we're going to do one on equity, climate, economics, and youth engagement. So hopefully we get a different group of folks watching that and being brought into the survey. We're also marketing it on Instagram, which usually gets that below 35 demographic. So trying our best, and we'd always love to hear from you all for ways that we can better reach folks. So.
Lisa put a comment in or a question in the chat. Sophie, is the survey available in Spanish?
Terry, I saw your mouth move, but I didn't hear you.
I mumbled to myself, what a great question. It is not yet, and we should look into that. We should do it.
Okay, great. So we've got Ed and then Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you. I prefer option 2, but I do have a concern. If we're really going to move the needle on affordability, I see a massive amount of work that needs to be done, and we're within a time frame of getting all of this done. But Terry, I've seen you work miracles before, but would you mind commenting to how much can we really do about affordability with the 2001 code rewrite?
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. And also it's a huge opportunity to take all the input that has been generated and use it in the larger conversations the city is having about housing. So those are happening at a bunch of different levels. What we can do within this project is somewhat limited, but that doesn't mean we can't kind of lay the trail for connecting this to other work. As soon as March 10th, the council will be having a work session on housing tools and strategies. more broadly and kind of turning that work into what we hope will be more like a housing implementation plan, which is so much more broad than implementing middle housing code. So it's a challenge that's inherent to this project, I think, to keep within the bounds of the project and also inspire solutions that are clearly really needed by our community. So as a project manager, I feel like job number one is get the code written and comply with the law. And then job number two is how else can we help move these conversations forward?
Great answer. I just think it's important that the panelists know the limitations with that. And then I reviewed all the panelists' priorities and I had some comments on that, but I'll wait until we're through talking about the two different options. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Lisa.
Thank you. So I do think we have a great opportunity to take a group of people who have a diverse composition that reflect our community and who have been already front-loaded with a tremendous amount of information and allow them to think about another element of the work that is eventually going to need to be done. I mean, we've had many conversations on the Planning Commission. City Council's had many conversations. We know that the solutions to housing are only going to start with HB 2001. That's just one piece of a smorgasbord of solutions that we need to utilize. And so I like the idea of giving, a day, maybe a day and a half, if the panelists are interested in it. I think it should ultimately be their decision. But, like I said, we have this great working group of people who could look at some of the work that has been done in the city. I would suggest the Housing Tools and Strategies report. There was over 80 options in that, right? Fresh eyes on it might be a great thing. So I'm in support of adding that if the panelists decide that is what they would like to do. I agree that there needs to be clarity on the scope of HB 2001. But I also want to amplify the idea that when we talk about affordability, there's a difference between affordability with a capital A and a lowercase a, right? So yes, we want to be ensuring that lower socioeconomic members in our community have access to housing options. But when we look at families or young people who have a mid-range of income, they are very, very challenged to have access to housing as well. As a teacher, I know so many young teachers, individuals and families who can't afford to buy homes, right? And so HB 2001 will generate more affordable housing with a lowercase a. And I think it's important that we consider that we need both. And so I just, I hope that is something that can also be part of the conversation because it will generate more housing.
Thank you, Lisa. Let's go to Jose and then Karin. You're on mute, Jose.
Terry, if there's a different timeline for getting the code done versus the more affordability conversation, one of the conversations that the Oversight Committee of panelists began to have is how do you keep the members of the panel engaged past the spring? And so I also would want to be careful that we don't rush through the coding stuff where we're shortchanging it because everyone's interest goes into affordability. and how do you figure out, well, the affordability is an ongoing conversation, so how can we maybe structure the summer to engage panelists into a much more in-depth conversation around that and strategizing?
Love that idea. I think that should be on the table. I mean, there's just questions about people's willingness to continue serving, budget questions, although it's a small amount in any project budget. I think that would be well worth it. So I love that you brought it up. I can shop it around to other folks at the city, but I think, yeah, I'm interested in what Lynn and Alex think about that, what Cheryl thinks about that, because you make a good point about not rushing the work on the House bill.
Yeah, and that way you keep the panelists engaged in something that you already know they have buy-in, and sustain that engagement longer.
Mm-hmm.
Let's maybe come back to that after we go to Karin and Jennifer.
Thank you, and I'm appreciating our discussion a lot today. I wanted to follow on a few of the comments, and just because I've also seen a few other email messages and in the broader community that are beginning to sort of float around that may be trying to sort of frame in an issue with a particular bias or negative impression that is, I don't think, accurate when thinking about the whole range of housing options and solutions that our community needs. So I shared in an email just before our meeting, just a link to the January 25th council meeting where Tyler Bump from Eco Northwest gave a presentation, as well as the panelists. I mean, I think we all know about that meeting, but I want to be sure that everyone on this committee listened carefully to those presentations and to the economic analysis shared, because we do have a significant issue with the majority of our community being cost burdened by their housing. And also we have an extraordinary capital A, capital H affordable housing crisis in our community. And those are all linked to one another in the housing market and options that we currently have. So I feel like the connection between the implementation of this law and what goes forward in our zoning with affordability options is actually critically important, because it's near the heart of what the community is hoping to accomplish. And it also makes that affordability conversation something that is more integrated with a requirement, right? So, we will go forward and of course meet the minimum standards of this law and allow the housing options that we have in many other conversations, been trying to achieve for a while. But there's also this, other collection of actions, some in zoning, right? Some of them are regulatory, and some of them have to do with financial incentives. And so I think that we should maybe gather a little bit more information about, what of that should be packaged with our House Bill 2001 code implementation, because other communities that have sought to, guarantee a path to affordable housing through missing middle housing have done it that way. And it's, I think, because, you don't leave the affordability component alone and vulnerable after all of the legal requirements have been met, if that makes sense. So, because it's not like dealing with the affordability will mean that we don't also meet the requirements of the law, but that we will have spent some time, thinking about these other goals and moving them forward.
Great. Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. The mask is weird. So I just wanted to say I was in favor of the second option as well. We have this group of people that have had all this time to be educated and talk to each other, and why would we not want to know what they think? But Jose brought up a really great point, and that is, do we want to try to shove it into the plan that we already have, or do we have options to extend this the timetable of this group meeting? I also don't know the answer to that, but it's a really good idea if we could, because then we still have the amount of time to go through what they already had to do, which is a lot, and then adding this affordability stuff afterwards. Either way, I do really think it would be worth our time to get that information from those folks. Yeah, I like the idea of exploring if we can extend it, if that's possible. And I'm glad to hear Jose is interested in doing that. That's awesome.
Thank you. Lynn.
Just very quickly, I suppose this probably goes without saying, but since Terry asked, I mean, we would be absolutely thrilled if that was possible. I actually just talked to our sort of colleague organization in Toronto that you know about, because they've done the standing panels for the planning department there, and they have a panel with a different agency who's in exactly this situation, but the agency is sort of exploring, can we extend this? Can we make it, a little bit longer term? And they're figuring out how to do that actually with two different panels at the moment. So yeah, and their sort of insight is that most of the panel is really enthusiastic about that, which I mean is our experience in the past too. We've never had a situation where we've gotten to the end and folks have been happy that it was ending. Always want more time and are sort of pushing us for how that can happen, and usually we're in a situation where we have to say sorry.
Thanks. And I see we've got Ken and Ed have their hands raised, and I think I'd love to kind of wrap up this initial survey of where people are at between those two proposals, and maybe now kind of a third proposal that's emerging, and then try to move into a decision process around that. And I know, Carolyn, you sent out an email, but if you'd be willing to slip in after Ken and Ed here and share a little bit about where you are between those two, that would be great. But first, let's do Ken. And Lynn, would you mind lowering your hand?
Okay, thanks. Let me try to be brief. I'm in support of the second option, where we, I guess, looking to incorporate as much as we can about affordability into the work that we're doing to amend the code to comply with HB 2001. I'm in support of everything I'm hearing. I guess I'm finding myself, I'm thinking a bit about what it is we have to do over the next several months in terms of putting draft code together, and then putting that in a place where bringing it to in a form where the panel can review that, whether they're reviewing code concepts or whether they're reviewing more finished draft. I'm thinking about the overall schedule. I think there's kind of and Terry knows all this, there's a hard deadline of mid 2022 for the council to have reviewed and hopefully approve what the amendments are that allow Eugene to implement the House Bill 2001. And I think one of the things we've talked about in the last few months was having a lot of the work on the code, I call it substantially complete, but kind of ready for review complete, whatever that looks like. But by the middle of this year, to go into what's a pretty additional public process over and above what we've been doing already. So there's multiple public hearings out there. There's review by the Planning Commission, ultimately review by the council, and so on. So I think as we have discussion about extending the time to review the code, about things that we're looking to put into it, it'd be good to sort of fit that in to some sort of a master schedule or work plan or milestone chart or something. So just some reactions I'm having. Anyway, I'm definitely in support of us as best we can incorporating the idea of affordability into this work.
Thank you, Ken. And I realize I would love to go to Carolyn if you're up to share your thoughts. And then I'm so sorry, Cheryl, I would love to hear from you as well. Your voice is crucial here in answering this question. Carolyn, do you have anything to add?
Well, sure. It seems like obviously we're all pretty much on the same page. I had just sent an email in response to the question that sure, I mean, how could we not have the panel talking about affordability? I just have a question though right now, I guess for Terry or something, but are we guiding the panel or in some way or steering them towards a conversation about affordability within House Bill 2001? Like, yes, no, maybe, is there any chance? So are we asking them to still stick only with affordability rate House Bill 2001? Or are we suddenly right now encouraging them to split off into two things, working on 2001 and a totally, separate parallel thing about affordability? I mean, what's actually our direction to them?
I think that's a great question. There is affordability language in the House bill that talks about increasing the affordability of middle housing. But I still feel like there's value in talking about things that have come up apart from middle housing.
Sure.
And so I'm a little conflicted, honestly. I'm hoping we can do both.
Yeah, I'm just curious because Healthy Democracy apparently was hired to work with panelists on House Bill 2001.
Mm-hmm.
So I just, if we're asking them to do something, separate, different, we should be clear about it. I mean, I feel like we're kind of like dancing around something that we're all interested in,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not clear what exactly the direction is here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks for flagging that, Carolyn. And before we go to Ken and Karen, Cheryl, any thoughts, Dad? Oh, you're on mute, Cheryl. We can't hear you. I think if you're on a phone, it might be a swipe, I think, or we can come back to
There
you.
we go.
There you go.
I'm for all of the things that Jose brought up and even possibly being used further down the road to help with other situations surrounding this. But I think probably we need to stay within the parameters, right, of what the timeline is. Isn't there a timeline on this bill? Don't we need to get things laid out and decided upon within a certain amount of time?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not quite sure what to say about that. I feel like we do need to stay within the boundaries of what we're set here to do as far as the bill goes. So I'm not quite sure about all the other stuff. We probably need to just get down to the nitty-gritty and get what you expect us to do done.
Mm-hmm. Could I respond to that just really quickly? Because I think there's a distinction or a difference in the bill language between what we need to do as a city to amend our zoning to allow the housing types that uses language such as the city shall, and it's directive language that tells us how to amend our zoning. The language about affordability uses the verb consider, and it gives us a much bigger range of possible actions. It actually says consider the following, considering but not limited to the following examples. And so the door is really wide open, but it does say for middle housing, consider ways to make middle housing more affordable, like these ways. And so I think we're starting to kind of circle around an idea that where it wouldn't be a problem necessarily to extend the panel's work if they were interested in that, because the code draft will be done under the terms of our grant with our consultants by mid-June, as Ken laid out. But the city can choose to consider things, ad infinitum. So I think that there's probably more conversations we need to have about who's interested in that and how do we fund it and how do we make it happen. if everybody wants it to happen. But we're not precluded from doing it by the deadline that's mid-June for code writing.
Okay. Sometimes though, within committee speak, I have difficulty understanding what you're saying because I'm an older person, not used to speaking in committees or with committees. So sometimes I feel like I'm not quite getting what you're saying sometimes. It can be so broad that, and I know that a lot of times you're not trying to lead people, but sometimes just yes or no questions help better with me.
Is there anything you need clarify or you want to hear more about in what Terry just said, Cheryl?
Isn't our purpose, I thought, was to work on this bill to implement low to middle housing within Eugene? When we start branching out and getting so broad, it just seems almost limitless, and I don't know, almost, I kind of like to know what I'm confined to, what exactly I'm doing. Am I writing code? Am I helping write code? Am I helping affordability? What am I doing? Am I giving suggestions on affordability? Like, maybe they shouldn't have granite in these, I don't know, I need concrete questions.
Okay. Thank you, Cheryl. I think that's really useful here. So if I may, do you have something urgent, Lynn?
Nope, sorry.
So if I may kind of summarize briefly where it sounds like we are here, is that there's interest in the panel considering something beyond HB 2001 implementation. There's some interest in that charge to the panel being an extension of the existing schedule. And there's also some fear that we'll get too broad or have too many questions on the table for the finite amount of time that we have in February and April.
Yes.
Okay. So we've got about 10 minutes. I do want to flag that it sounds like we're in a place where we can say we're doing some version of proposal 2. We've heard from everybody at this point, and there's been no objection to that. So that's, we've made that decision. I think it's just a matter of how. And we have this meeting to continue discussing, maybe kind of develop some slightly more specific proposal for how that happens, or exactly how that's organized. And since proposal 2, the affordability strategies wouldn't be coming in a big way in the February sessions anyway, we kind of have the benefit of taking March and even that first meeting in April of the steering committee to get a little bit more into the nitty gritty of how that happens. So that's where we are. Lynn, anything to add to that? And I see Karen and Lisa.
Sorry, properly raising my hand now, playing with my hand. Yeah, thanks for that summary. I just wanted to flag, just in the limited time we have here, just one more question there that I'm wondering if the committee could help us out with a little bit, is in addition to, so the survey and the questions and examples in there will provide some basis for the panel's work in February, but there have been a proposal or two about other information that we should provide to the panel. And I just want to get feedback on that real fast, because that's sort of immediate for our, what we're going to mail to panelists in the next day or two, actually. Yeah, and just to preface that by saying that it's really important that we get, any sort of baseline information to the panel that this committee feels like should get there, and also that there is always a question about equity and whether there can be too much information, and that can create a situation on the panel where some folks have read it and some folks haven't, and there can be sort of that can not necessarily be a totally bad thing, but also there can be imbalances there that don't necessarily foster the most deliberation. So being really intentional about exactly which things are most important to send would be really helpful if folks have suggestions about that. And I think Carolyn's had a suggestion about that, and I believe Terry and Sophie have a suggestion about that as well. So maybe that's a place to start.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that question back. Yeah, in this kind of like proposal 3, it slipped off my radar a little bit. So let's go briefly to Karin and Lisa, and then really spend our last few minutes talking about materials that should get mailed.
I think my comments actually follow on some of what Cheryl was describing, and that I think it's when we're two things. One, because this was something that was discussed at the, through the statewide model code subcommittee and rule committees as well. It is important, and I guess my advice is that staff, have a conversation with our city's attorney's office to make sure that in our good faith efforts to do what we are needing out of this bill, that we not create legal vulnerability to our implementation of this law. And that's a simple way of saying that, not everyone is really excited about having housing options. And if they see that we've strayed from our lane in this process, they may use that to launch an appeal against the process and undermine all of this good work and all of these energies, because that's a pattern that, we've seen here and in other places around middle housing. So maybe one thought, get clear on what the legal exposure is with some of this and how to make sure we have all of that buttoned up. The other piece is that relative to accomplishing affordability, and I'll offer this, to Cheryl and Jose, because conceptually, I think this is important for the panel. The missing middle housing that is addressed through House Bill 2001, these are really like the 4 smallest types of missing middle housing. Missing middle housing officially is everything between the single family home and a larger apartment building. This bill only addresses, maybe up to, quads, right? 4 units to a parcel, cottage clusters, that could be a couple of more than that. In other communities and places, when they have wanted to accomplish affordability, they have looked at what other types of housing or mixes of housing or unit sizes or numbers of unit per parcel would we need to allow in order to create that path. And that's the type of work that I see conceptually fitting in really cleanly with the work that the committee is already doing, because you'll already be hearing economic analysis on cottage clusters and townhouses or and quads or any of the other types. And so if from there was an additional piece of analysis that said, we would expect that type of development in this context, might be in this range, and you want us to be, thinking about how to accomplish this range, here's the type of housing or the number of units that would get you to those numbers. Does that make sense? So it's really kind of like, it's sort of the next step in the analysis, because the challenge with accomplishing affordability through the private market is figuring out how to construct the regulatory framework and the development opportunities so that you can get a lower cost per unit, which then translates into lower tenancy or lower sale price, all of that other stuff. Other communities have also decided, Portland did this with their, oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, do you mind if I kind of move us into speaking about materials? I super appreciate this and want to make sure that we don't get cut off by the city's other meeting by.
Oh, and I have to run also too. I guess then I just want everyone to know it's not actually super complicated to do the work that we need to do, but it does require attention.
Okay. Thank you, and sorry to move us along kind of forcefully here. I think it might make sense to move the actual decision making about what materials get sent out to the panel to a post-meeting email. So let's just get some proposals on the table, some ideas on the table, and we'll go to Lisa now.
Are you wanting suggestions about materials or about the charge at this point?
I know you've had your hand up for a while, so feel free to make your other comment if it can be brief.
It's about both. Either
Okay.
one's fine. I'll be brief. So one, I'm hearing the panelists say that they feel like adding a whole nother element might be too much. And I really appreciate the idea Jose suggested to stay focused on this go around and see if the panel can be continued to do additional affordability work. I think that was a brilliant solution. So I think that question needs to be answered. I actually wanted to talk about the materials piece. And I think it's really important that the panel understands what are the base regulations, like what's the minimum. And then it's very clear from the information and the values that they presented, and we heard this from all of the stakeholder groups, that people want us to go beyond that. They want us to do a much better job than that. So giving information that provides options for them to evaluate about what are the ways that we can encourage additional choices in housing? What are the ways that we can incentivize additional choices in housing? What are the options for them to look at that will touch on the sustainability? What are the options for them to look at to go beyond the base code that will also encourage some of the values that they expressed? And so when we look at the information that we want to give them, I think understanding the base regulations, which the planning department has clearly articulated some of that information already, but then also providing options that allow them to understand how as a community we can go beyond the base. I think they need information like that to reach the values that they articulated.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. And I know we're going to get booted off right at 2. So I think what I want to propose is that if anybody has additional materials just for this first round of February sessions, so you don't need to think about all the materials that might be useful in thinking about affordability more generally, but the February sessions now focusing on these kind of code questions, the survey, and they're also going to be making public engagement recommendations. What is kind of most important to mail out in the panelist packet tomorrow so it gets to them on time. So if you can, just immediately after this meeting or in the next hour or so, email me and Lynn with those materials, and then I'm just signing us up for something, Lynn, here, but we'll figure out some way of getting some email feedback on that.
Yeah, we won't be able to do a ton. Yep, Terry.
I was just going to say I'll send along the packet links for both the Planning Commission 2 meetings and the City Council meeting. They have, I think, all the succinct information that might be pertinent.
Great. Thank you so much. Anything else, Lynn, before we?
It doesn't have to be absolutely the next hour. We're not going to mail them today. We're going to mail them probably on Saturday. So we have a little bit of, that's not a lot of time, but a little bit of feedback to us about, what we should and shouldn't cover. Going off of that baseline from Terry of the council materials would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Since we're not being kicked off right away, I would just really say most of us, 99% of the panelists have never seen or read code. So a 101, what is code? This is how it looks like. This is how we use. These are its implications.
Right.
Great. Thank you for that addition, Jose. And thank you. Oh, Lisa, do you have one parting thought here? No, just a hand from earlier. Okay, thank you all so much. We'll be in touch and we'll see you again next month. Thank you.
You.